Hello and welcome to the MOOCs course on International Economics. In this lecture, we will study about another economic integration model which is specific to South Asia, and it is SAARC, which is the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation. Now, in the last class, we studied about the European Economic Community, which we understood was one of the oldest economic integration model that came into existence in the 1950s, and it was in the form of a customs union, primarily a free trade agreement plus various rules and regulations with regard to uniform tariffs and free movement of goods, services and labor between the member states of the EEC. That provided us a base or a foundation to be able to look at some more economic integration models, and it is useful to look at one of the economic integration models which is very close to India, and India is one of the dominant players of this economic integration model, which is the SAARC. Now, so we want to look into some of the details of SAARC. SAARC is a very old organization by now, about 30 years old or more. And there are many initiatives that have taken place as a part of the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, of the SAARC, but it is there are many failures of SAARC as well, which is generally discussed in the context of the literature or international economics. As part of this lecture, we will basically try to understand what is SAARC and what is the economic implication of SAARC, and what are the economic aspects of this this integration model called SAARC. Although SAARC can also be looked at as a political organization, and therefore there are various other development initiatives that have taken place as a part of SAARC. However, it will be beyond the scope of the international economics model to focus on many of those aspects. Therefore, in this lecture, I will restrict my my lecture to some of the important economic aspects of the formation called SAARC. So, what is SAARC? SAARC is basically the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, and it is a regional intergovernmental organization, basically promoting economic and regional integration among its member countries in the South Asian region. It was established in December 1985 and is headquartered in Kathmandu, Nepal. And the member countries are Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Maldives, Nepal, Pakistan and Sri Lanka, with Afghanistan joining SAARC as its 8th member in 2007. Now, there are very broad objectives of SAARC, because it is not just an economic regional formation, but it is also a political formation, and therefore it has many social and political objectives with far-reaching consequences as well. If we have to list out some of the main objectives of this formation of SAARC, one is that it is aimed at promoting economic growth, social progress and cultural development in the region. Now, as learners in the South Asian region, we all understand that the post-Second World War period has been a period of nation building for many South Asian countries that were under the colonial rule, were under the imperious rule of European countries, particularly the Great Britain and a few other European countries as well. So, in the context of nation building and economic development and economic progress, the SAARC was looked at very positively as one of the important formations that can bring about large amounts of growth through international trade among the South Asian countries. So, in that sense, this was a very important formation, because for the very first time, the South Asian region, the erstwhile colonial countries, were coming together for international trade. And if you look at the product mix of countries in the South Asian region, the product mix is varied, and therefore it had huge advantages to international trade within this region. So, in that sense, it promoted the objective of economic growth, social progress and cultural development. Culturally also, there is a a lot of heterogeneity within the South Asian region, but there are many commonalities as well. So in that sense, the regional cooperation of SAARC was looked at very positively by not just the countries within South Asia, but also countries outside the region. Secondly, the objective was to strengthen collective self-reliance among South Asian nations. Now, this concept of self-reliance, for a student of economics, you would understand that since the period of planning that began in India and many other countries in this region, there was a lot of focus on building its own resources, or as I mentioned, nation building in the beginning. There was a lot of focus on being self-reliant on the country's own resources, and therefore being able to provide impetus to growth and development by expanding its own markets, because there was a lot of reliance on secondary goods or manufactured goods from countries in the West. So throughout the period of the 1950s, 60s, 70s, some of the countries in the South Asian region were formed in the 1970s. So the history of SAARC is actually not very old as the European Economic Community, but it's relatively new compared to the EEC. But the objective of collective self-reliance among South Asian nations was fueled by this need for building a more closed network outside of the European Union or the Western countries following the Cold War. Thirdly, there was a broad objective of enhancing collaboration in science, technology, agriculture and rural development, and this also has interconnections with the South Asian regions primarily exporting primary goods and services, and there was a felt need for constructing or building indigenous technology because of lack of resources, because of lack of informed know-how and technology that needed to be imported from the West. There was a lot of felt need for being able to create our own technology that can be used in agriculture, rural development and in the industry as well. And there was a felt need that it would be possible to be able to gather these resources together only when there is collaboration within the region, because the region understands its own problems, and the region has been subject to imperialism in the past, and therefore it will be able to gather the resources and the political will to be able to implement collaborative efforts at science technology. So the third objective was to enhance collaboration in science, technology, agriculture and rural development. The fourth was, of course, to improve the quality of life for people in this region, because if you look at some of the human development indicators, whether it's education, literacy, health, or the cost or the standard of living of people in this region, the South Asian region continues to be one of the laggard regions, both in the World Bank income classification as well as the Human Development Index ranking that is carried out globally by the Human Development Report. So, because there were commonalities across this region, because some of the countries like Bangladesh and Pakistan were also formed from with the partition of India. So there were many cultural commonalities, there were many social and economic commonalities that it was felt that the people of this region can understand their problems better and therefore coordinate among each other better to be able to improve the quality of life for people. And finally, it was formed as an encouragement for mutual trust and understanding among the member states. Now, I mentioned in the beginning that SAARC is not just an economic integration model, it is also a political organization, which means that it had far-reaching objectives which did not just pertain to economic agreements. So, many initiatives have been taken place as a part of the SAARC as an economic integration model. I have listed out only 3 here in terms of the relevance to our course material. One is the South Asian Free Trade Area, or the South Asian Free Trade Agreement in the context of SAFTA. Now it will make sense to our learners to understand a little more about SAFTA, because we have already been introduced to EEC and free trade agreements and areas, and also the customs union and so on. So I have listed 3 initiatives here: the SAFTA, which is a trade agreement to reduce tariffs and boost intra-regional trade. Secondly, the SAARC Development Fund, which to support regional development projects. This also has economic implications because it supports various kinds of infrastructural facilities and so on. And the SAARC Disaster Management Center, which coordinates disaster response in the region. We all know that India, Bangladesh, Nepal are some of the countries which are very susceptible to natural disasters, and economic and political organizations such as the SAARC provides a lot of momentum to be able to share data and resources to come up with common planning or resilient planning as far as disasters is concerned. And disasters also have intrinsic relationship with the economy, because when a hazard becomes a disaster, it leads to various kinds of economic damages and losses. And because the nature of disaster is public in nature, it has public goods characteristics, which means that it has characteristics which are non-excludable and are non-rival in nature, then it becomes important for various kinds of non-market interventions, for example, cooperation and collaboration between the governments, or intergovernmental cooperation and collaboration. So it is in that sense, initiatives such as the SAARC Disaster Management Center also needs to be studied very closely. However, as part of this lecture, my focus will be on SAFTA, or the South Asian Free Trade Area. Now, these 3 are not the only initiatives that have been carried out by SAARC over the period of last many years. Many other initiatives have also been carried out. Some have been successful, some unsuccessful. However, there are many other programs and initiatives that have been carried out as a part of SAARC and the member states within SAARC. Now, let us focus on more narrowly on what is SAFTA. So, it is South Asian Free Trade Area. It is basically a trade agreement among the SAARC member countries aiming at intra-regional trade by reducing tariffs and trade barriers. So it is more or less on the same lines as the EEC that we studied earlier. However, there is a major difference between the EEC and SAFTA, because SAFTA is a free trade agreement, whereas the EEC was a customs union, which means that it slowly evolved into a single market. But SAARC or SAFTA has not turned into a single market. The bilateral trade agreements are carried out by individual member states with other countries as well. As an agreement, the SAFTA as part of SAARC was signed in January 2004 in Islamabad, Pakistan, and came into effect in 2006. Now, what were the objectives of SAFTA? First is, of course, to reduce tariffs and trade barriers, lower tariffs on goods traded between the SAARC nations so as to promote regional trade. So if Bangladesh is selling garments to India, then we reduce tariffs on garments so that they have better markets, access to expanded markets within India, and so on and so forth. So one of the first objective was to reduce tariffs and trade barriers. Second was to promote economic cooperation so as to enhance trade and economic collaboration to boost regional development. Third was the corollary of the reduction in tariffs and trade barriers was, of course, to improve market access because the demands of population in the South Asian region have commonalities. It was felt that if markets are expanded beyond the borders of the nation states, then it will lead to more profits of firms within the countries concerned. So facilitating movement of goods and services within South Asia by improving market access was one of the major objectives. Fourth objective was to encourage industrialization within SAFTA by supporting industries in SAARC countries. And finally, for reduction of poverty and economic disparities, because poverty was one of the important hallmarks of all of these countries in South Asia. So at the backdrop, one of the important objective for promoting economic cooperation or reducing tariffs and trade barriers was mainly to strengthen regional economic integration for improvement of livelihoods. But SAFTA faced various challenges in its implementation, and it is important for us to understand these challenges. We must also understand that although SAARC was one of the major economic cooperations carried out among South Asian countries, it has not been as successful as, say, the EEC or the NAFTA currently. There are many reasons as to why this has not been successful, but let us now look at some of the challenges within SAFTA, which was a part of, which was a FTA that was carried out within the SAARC countries. First was there was limited intra-regional trade. South Asia has one of the lowest levels of intra-regional trade, which is just about around 5% of the total trade. And if you compare it with ASEAN, EU, ASEAN has about 25% of the total trade and EU has about 60% of the total trade. So clearly SAFTA lags behind in terms of being able to gather resources or generate resources, generate trust within the member countries within SAARC to be able to have more and more of inter-regional trade or increase the volume of inter-regional trade. So in terms of size, SAFTA lags behind many other associations and organizations, economic integration models really. Second is geopolitical tensions. The South Asian regions have very volatile borders, and because of various kinds of border tensions, it has also hindered economic cooperation. India-Pakistan conflicts, India-Bangladesh conflicts, the India-Bhutan conflicts and so on. All of these have hindered economic cooperation, not just in the case of territorial integrity, but also in terms of water resources, land resources, and various other natural resources. There have been various forms of geopolitical tensions that have brought about political instability in SAARC countries, and that has ultimately affected the trade agreements. Thirdly, there are large lists, sensitive lists. Countries maintain very long lists of exempted goods, thereby limiting the actual tariff reductions. So although SAFTA was formed with a view to reducing tariffs and trade barriers or lowering the tariffs on goods traded among SAARC nations, what we see in reality is that there are large lists or sensitive lists, and there are long lists of exemptions that are implemented by these countries, which actually limit the impact of tariff reductions, and therefore ultimately it reduces the benefits of free trade agreement. Next is with regard to non-tariff barriers. There are many complex issues of customs procedures, poor infrastructure, and strict regulatory standards that create economic hurdles of being able to execute the economic agreements. There is also a lack of trade complementarity. So what happens is SAARC economies often export similar goods, and that clearly reduces the benefits of trade integration. So for example, India and Bangladesh may be producing similar kinds of goods, so it does not have much relevance for trade, because you would know that trade is also based upon the basic idea of comparative advantage, and if you don't have a comparative advantage on production of a certain good, then it reduces the relevance to trade. So there's a lack of trade complementarity, and therefore SAARC economies often export similar goods and services, which has a huge impact on the benefits of trade integration. So what is the current status and future of SAFTA? One is that SAFTA has so far not fully achieved its goal because of political and economic challenges. So there are many border tensions between countries. Unless the border tensions are dealt with in a proactive manner or are contained, it will not be, trade agreements are ultimately stalled. Similarly, India has pursued many bilateral trade agreements with SAARC members instead of relying on SAFTA because of various political barriers, because of various non-tariff barriers. Countries prefer to have bilateral trade agreements with the member nations than taking it through SAFTA, and therefore SAFTA suffers. Some experts have suggested moving towards a South Asian Economic Union for deeper integration. And strengthening transport infrastructure, digital trade, and reducing sensitive lists could actually help boost regional trade as far as SAFTA is concerned. Instead, currently there are many other alternative regional trade agreements that are being seen. For example, the BIMSTEC or the Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multi-Sectoral Technical and Economic Cooperation is slowly emerging as a more active trade platform. And India-Bangladesh, India-Sri Lanka, and India-Nepal bilateral trade agreements are being seen as more effective than SAFTA. Now, so far what we have studied is SAARC and the major objectives of SAARC, and we have seen that there are many key initiatives that SAARC member nations have carried out. And among the key initiatives, we highlighted SAFTA, the SAARC Development Fund SDF, and the SAARC Disaster Management Center SDMC. And we chose to focus on SAFTA as a continuation of our economic integration model regarding the European Economic Community. And we saw that the SAFTA in idea was sort of a perfect kind of a free trade agreement that was ideated, and the objectives were also clearly towards moving towards promoting economic cooperation and expanding markets, reducing poverty and economic disparity. But in reality, we saw that there are many challenges, particularly first with regard to the size of international trade. ASEAN and EU are far ahead of SAFTA in terms of the size of the international intra-regional trade being carried out. Geopolitical tensions are an important reason why SAFTA implementation execution has challenges. There are many sensitive lists which are used as exemption for trade, which is of course not benefiting countries in SAFTA. And there are many non-tariff barriers, particularly related to poor infrastructure, regulatory standards and so on. And also there is a lack of trade complementarity. We also looked at the current status and future of SAFTA, and we saw that many other alternative regional trade agreements are coming in place of SAFTA, and which are slowly turning as more active trade platforms. And however, since we are discussing SAARC, that can be taken up in a different model. Now, let's look at the arrangements like SAFTA a little more analytically. Because we have studied about customs union and the EEC. So let us look at some of these things from a more theoretical point of view. So first, trade creation versus trade diversion. Now with respect to trade creation, SAFTA should ideally promote efficient trade within South Asia by reducing tariffs. But in terms of trade diversion, we have seen that because of sensitive lists and political barriers, trade was often diverted to extra-regional partners, example China and European Union. So although you had a SAFTA economic regional formation, you had an agreement in the form of a free trade area, the beneficiaries of the intra-regional trade was actually going to countries outside of the SAARC, particularly China, given its dominance in the scenario of international trade, as well as the European Union. So there was an issue of trade creation versus trade diversion. So although trade was not getting created, more and more trade was getting diverted from SAFTA. Secondly, the issue of comparative advantage on intra-industry trade. South Asian economies, as we have seen, as one of the challenges of SAFTA, lacked trade complementarity, meaning that they produce and export similar goods, example textiles or agriculture or primary goods and services. So the terms of trade could not be established well, and it reduced potential gains from regional trade integration. So there was no comparative advantage as far as intra-industry trade is concerned within the SAFTA. Thirdly, there were institutional weaknesses and non-tariff barriers. So because of weak enforcement of agreements, bureaucratic delays, complex customs procedures and infrastructure gaps, these gaps hindered trade, and these non-tariff barriers made regional trade costly despite tariff reductions under the SAFTA. Then, with regard to the hub and spoke model, India actually dominates SAFTA but prefers bilateral trade agreements. So that led to some kind of a political problem as far as India's dominance within SAFTA is concerned in terms of its size, because India is one of the biggest countries within the SAARC region. But India preferring bilateral trade agreements because of the non-tariff barriers and because of other geopolitical tensions, and instead of promoting the deep regional integration became a bit of a problem, and this undermined SAFTA's effectiveness as a multilateral trade framework. So the hub and spoke model that was envisaged as a part of SAFTA started suffering. Structural constraints and unequal gains. Smaller economies, example Bhutan, Maldives, they started fearing the economic domination by India, and the least developed countries in SAARC basically depend on special provisions, slowing full liberalization. So so in this second part of this lecture, what we have done is to look at the arrangements of SAFTA a little more analytically in the context of customs union, and how instead of creating trade, it has led to trade diversion and giving rise to various other kinds of trade-offs, with regard to the economic formation of SAFTA in the context of SAARC. Now, let me end this lecture by looking at India's position and importance in SAARC. So, because we have spoken about how India dominates SAFTA and how other smaller countries have been challenged, or they have been on the back step because of India carrying out bilateral agreements with countries outside of SAARC. So it is in this context it is appropriate to end today's lecture by looking at India's position and importance within SAARC. The first point is that India is the largest economy and market within SAARC, which means that it contributes over 70% of SAARC's GDP, and it is the largest trading partner for most SAARC countries. And as a result of this, its economic size makes it a natural leader in regional cooperation, which leads to various kinds of power dimensions or power negotiations as far as the countries within SAARC is concerned. India clearly is in a more has an upper hand as far as negotiations and deals are concerned within the SAARC region. The second point is that with regard to geopolitical influence and regional stability. Now, India's relations with Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh and Sri Lanka significantly impacts SAARC's functioning. India-Pakistan tensions have stalled many SAARC summits and agreements multiple times, and this has impacted not just India and Pakistan but all the member states within SAARC as well. Third point is with regard to trade and connectivity hub. India is geographically central to SAARC because sharing land or maritime borders with all members except Afghanistan. And infrastructure projects like Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal motor vehicle agreement aim to improve regional connectivity. But this also has many geopolitical ramifications. The geographical centrality of India within SAARC in terms of sharing the land or maritime borders has many other geopolitical ramifications. Fourth point is with regard to bilateral versus multilateral approach. Now, instead of relying solely on SAARC, India pursues bilateral trade agreements with neighbors, example India, Sri Lanka, India, Bangladesh trade deals, etc. And this of course weakens SAARC's collective bargaining power, but it strengthens India's economic influence. I have already mentioned that alternative regional initiatives have been promoted, such as the BIMSTEC, because of SAARC's inefficiency. BIMSTEC excludes Pakistan, which is where again India takes a lead in terms of its trade negotiations. India also engages in ASEAN and Indo-Pacific trade blocs for wider regional influence. Finally, there is a lot of development assistance and aid. India provides significant financial aid, infrastructure support and capacity building programs to SAARC nations in the form of power projects to Nepal, scholarships for Afghan students and so on. So the SAARC Development Fund is largely backed by India. So essentially what these points highlight is that India continues to be in a dominant position as far as SAARC is concerned. The SAARC as a political organization continues to have a lot of relevance. However, the trade dimension suffers because of some of the economic aspects of lack of trade complementarity and the various kinds of non-tariff barriers and having bilateral agreements outside of the regional formation is concerned. So these are some of the important points to be kept in mind. And also with this lecture, the learners can also find a difference between the customs union, which was the European Economic Community, and SAARC, and the free trade agreement, particularly SAFTA within SAARC. What are the important differences between that formation, the EEC, and a more narrow formation within the South Asian region, the SAFTA. For this lecture, I have referred to materials from the SAARC Secretariat, which is available online. So I would encourage the learners to visit the Secretariat of SAARC and refer to the publication section of the SAARC website to have more details about the current ongoings as far as trade negotiations or various kinds of political collaborations or extra governmental cooperation that is taking place within the member states within SAARC. I hope you have enjoyed this lecture. Thank you.